up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to another Dan vs. review. This is the review for Dan vs. Elise's Parents, I can't speak right. Dan vs. Elise's Parents, Season 1, Episode 16. Holy moly, I definitely know that I fricked that up, but that is okay. So, before I get too much into the recap as well as the review, just know that the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, so go ahead and follow that link. But first, a really quick recap of this episode. Dan wants to go to the Renaissance Fair with Chris, but he can't because Elise's parents are in town, so Dan needs to find a way to deal with them. Plenty of little things to talk about in this episode. The first thing that I wanted to kind of briefly mention, a few pointers here and there, was Dan's personality. Now, I know I've talked about his personality and his knowledge base multiple times, but whatever. There are always some little points that I gotta bring up because it always makes me think about his character a little bit more in a sense. At the very beginning of the episode, Dan gives himself the title of Mighty Lord and Chris the fool, or rather his fool, I guess, in a sense, which kind of makes sense. It absolutely boosts Dan's ego, which he seems like the kind of character who would do something like that, who would, give himself that high and mighty title, really. Dan seems to know proper verbiage of, Renaissance and medieval times, which, given his liking of Shakespearean theater, makes sense. So it was kind of something I noticed early on in the episode, and I don't know why, but I don't know, who knows, I tend to look at all different kinds of little bits and facts here and there, but yeah. Another little odd note, I noticed that Dan called Chris his best friend in this particular episode. I don't recall if he's done that in previous episodes, but it was interesting because for some reason, it just really stuck out to me that he said it that one particular time, and I don't know if he said it in the past, maybe he has, but it was still interesting to think about. I mean, I didn't want to have to go through all of my previous reactions to, find out exactly, because that would have been a lot of scenes to look through, but for some reason it just really stuck out to me that he specifically called Chris his best friend in that instance. So, I don't know, just a random thought, I guess. Dan also seems fairly capable of learning or remembering things. Granted, he does have an entire big long list of things he wants to get revenge at, so of course he would, be capable of learning or remembering things. He already has a patchwork of knowledge, as Chris put it. I suppose the biggest thing that stuck out to me in regards to that particular aspect was the fact that Elise gave Dan some rules regarding, interacting with her parents. So, don't mess with the house, no bodily harm, no arson, and being polite. And he seemed to remember all of those rules, immediately after she said that. I mean, probably the only reason that he would follow them necessarily, and again, that was an interesting point too, that he followed them at all, but thinking about it, the only reason he probably really did follow was because Elise was the one who was giving him the rules, and it was Elise who was threatening him, and I think he knows by now that you just don't mess with Elise. One more thing that I noticed was that Dan seemed to realize at the end of the episode that he made a moral mistake and he tries to fix it. Now that's something that hasn't really happened before. Granted, he had help from Miss Mumbles. And yes, I'm still going to be calling her Miss Mumbles. I don't even care what Dan does, I'm going to still call her Miss Mumbles. But even with help from her, he still realizes at the end he made a moral mistake, which is something he doesn't really do very often, at least as far as I've seen so far. So it was really interesting to see him, recognize that fact and, work to fix it, even though he was kind of, reluctant to in a sort of way. But, good job, Miss Mumbles. Good job for convincing him. Thank you. With that, there are also two particular different kinds of relationships that I was also looking at throughout the entirety of this episode. Namely, I feel like the biggest highlight was the relationship between Elise's parents, Don and Elise Sr., more on that later, and Chris, as well as the relationship between Elise's parents and Elise herself. I feel like the one between the parents and Chris was a little bit more worthy mention of a highlight, so let's just go ahead and talk a little bit about the relationship between Elise and her parents first. So first off is the interesting thing that, like I said, it's Elise's parents are Don and Elise Sr., which is interesting. It was revealed when Elise's mother called Elise Jr., which apparently Elise does not like. I mean, I don't entirely blame her, because, the mother is the senior, and there's a daughter junior, but not the dad? I mean, I just wasn't expecting it. Expectation subversion, really. But Dan can also tell when Elise is tense. So that's interesting for two reasons. One, that Dan can even tell when Elise is, emotionally tense, or physically tense, or maybe even a combination of both. But the second interesting point is that it's very telling that with her reaction, it shows how she feels about her parents when they're there. Like, she clearly has affections for them. They're clearly her parents, and, they all love each other very much, but she still doesn't have, like, the perfect relationship with her parents. I mean, I can get that. I don't have the perfect relationship with my parents. They don't have the perfect relationship with their parents. Well, technically, one of them is dead now, and the other is practically dead to the family. Both on my dad's side, unfortunately. But during Elise and Dan's conversation about her parents, Elise even goes into a little bit more detail, like, it's saying that she thinks that her parents judge her in her every single move and every aspect of her life, including Chris, more on that later. But, I feel like normally something like that might be a little bit exaggerated, especially in, cartoon shows, but in this case, I'd say it's pretty on point. Elise even said, too, that her parents expected her to have perfect marks and to be an overachiever and to be the captain of every team possible or something like that. Like, I know those kinds of parents. Kids can love them, but they can be a little much to deal with. I mean, my parents weren't quite on that level. Like, they expected my sister and I, sure, to, get good grades because, that's who we were. That's what they expected of us because we were capable of being able to get those kinds of grades. But that's a little bit different. That's a little bit different from Elise's parents. So, yeah, I do feel a little bit bad for her that she has those types of parents, unfortunately. I know that there's a term for it. Like, there's a helicopter parent, lawnmower parent, I can't remember the phrase or name of the type of parent who wants their kids to just be an overachiever and be the best at everything, but it's slipping my mind right now. But the relationship between Elise and her parents is definitely explored a little bit. I mean, especially because, Elise's parents have had a couple of brief cameos in the past, but this was the first time that they had significant roles in the general story. But there was also interesting relationship bits between the parents as well as Chris, aka the relationship between the in-laws. As I kind of suspected, it was kind of clear right from the get-go that Elise's parents don't really like Chris too much, especially Don, which I can't say I'm terribly surprised about. Like, Elise Sr. didn't really seem to have very high hopes for him either, but Don especially did not. His tone constantly throughout the episode when he was talking to Chris was very sarcastic and belittling in so many ways. I mean, Don immediately in the episode when, there was a conversation between him and Chris, immediately brings up Chris's career, which he is apparently unemployed, by the way, which I had no idea when he got fired, but it had to have been sometime between the early part of the season. What was it? Traffic? Was that episode? Where Chris was out of job or something like that? I don't exactly know. But he apparently got unemployed at some point in time. But there are so many times where his tone alone just implies that he does not like Chris. And, I get it. In-laws not necessarily liking each other. It's a pretty common stereotype that exists. But Don really does it in a way that really irks me for some reason. Like, he's using one of those kinds of tones that probably should not be used when you're talking to your in-laws, or at least what I think how you should be talking to your in-laws and how you shouldn't be. It could just be my perception, but it just rubbed me the wrong way. Heck, Don and Elise Sr. even mentioned to Chris that they would have preferred if Elise had married somebody else and an ex from her past named Colby or something like that. I don't exactly know, but they say it, they mention it, like, in front of Chris to Elise, right? I think that was it. Yeah, in front of Chris to Elise. They mention that. It's like, I think it was that moment, or maybe a little bit earlier, that really solidified my my extreme dislike for these characters. It was one of the few rare instances where I'm like, okay, Dan, you can take revenge on them. I don't mind. I don't think I said it aloud, but I was definitely thinking it because I did not like these two characters. And even when Elise Sr. was trying to convince Don to be nice, he still was using words and tones that cast Chris in a very negative light, and it was just very unpleasant to watch all the interactions. It was super unpleasant. I can understand the stereotype of in-laws not getting along, not liking each other, disapproving of one another, something like that. I mean, it's real life. There are plenty of, in-laws, especially parents and the and the spouse of their child, who just usually might have some rough relationships, but that's not necessarily the case with my family, at least, because a great example is that my mom's parents, both of them, or not both of them, well, my mom's parents had divorced by the time she was like 15, 16, and both of them remarried before I was even born. So both of those couples have been married for a long time, and I just recognized for the longest time that, oh, well, I got 4 grandparents on my mom's side, and I got a few on my dad's side. Like, yeah, it seemed totally normal to me. And those 2 grandparents who married into the family, they still treated me like a grandchild, like a legitimate grandchild. Like, I've said it a few times in the past with a few other types of episodes like this, but blood of the covenant is thicker than the womb of the water. Family is not always blood. In-laws can be family as well. Chris seems to be trying to get them to like him, but clearly Don and Elise Sr. do not have much of an interest. I mean, Elise Sr. maybe a slight bit, but Don definitely not. But at least Chris is trying, and it's just... it rubs me the wrong way watching every single interaction between the 3 of them, or between Chris and Don in particular. It just really rubbed me the wrong way just watching all these interactions, all these implications with tones and words, or explicitly stating stuff that in-laws should not be explicitly stating in front of said in-laws, but... I don't like these characters. I mean, heck, I don't know. Maybe that was the intention. I really couldn't say. Maybe that was the intention for, or the stereotypical in-laws to, not like the main character or something. I don't know. I don't know if that was the intention. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't, but it is what it is. But I do not like these 2 characters in particular. No. Anyways, it wouldn't be a Dan versus episode, a proper Dan versus episode, without some parodies and jokes thrown in. And clearly, there were some Mafia parodies that were thrown in here. Dan pretends that cupcake is the new lingo for kill, and it actually is the new lingo for kill. An undercover agent's name is Louis. And he has an Italian accent. It sounded like an Italian accent. Undercover agent likes to cross-dress as well, apparently. Hidden cameras all over the place. Oh no! The undercover cop works for the Mafia! Oh no! Like that hasn't been seen before. Or conceived before. Mafia members having Italian accents. That was a terrible impression, but I am so sorry. Other people are revealed to be secretly involved with the Mafia, at least at the end of the episode. I'm talking about Elise's mother. Don was never involved with the Mafia, even though Jan tried to make it seem like Don was involved with the Mafia, but it was... Not only was it not Don, it was actually Elise Sr., and even Don doesn't know about it, so... Like mother, like daughter, keeping secrets from husbands. I guess I can't say I'm surprised. But I think that there was also some Italian music playing in the background on occasion sometimes as well. I think? So many jokes, nods, hints, parodies, references at all these friggin', Mafia movies and TV shows. Granted, I don't necessarily know by a lot, but I at least know a little bit about the tropes that exist. Like, yes, it may be a sin to learn. I have not watched The Godfather all the way through, but even I know some of the interesting stuff. I think my dad actually referenced The Godfather in a car ride with me and my sister. Like, I think he just kind of referenced The Godfather, and I was like, take the cannoli. My dad starts bursting out laughing because he cannot believe I just pulled that out of my ass. My sister stared at me like, what the frick did you just say? And my dad and I had to explain to her that no, it's a joke, it's a reference from The Godfather. One of the few I actually know fairly well, mostly because it was ad-libbed. I'm not super familiar with this genre, but I at least know enough about the tropes. I mean, for the most part, I think so. And one little random, final, miscellaneous thing that I wanted to talk about when Elise and Dan are having a conversation about her parents and how nervous she's, and how, they're overbearing and wanted her to be an overachiever, and all of a sudden she spouts out, why do you think I became the top operative in a shadowy quasi-government association? And she stops herself and she's like, oh, wait, what? But it's the closest we've heard to what Elise really does, so it can be explored. Her job, the organization she works with, her maybe coworkers or boss, whatever. But it can be explored. This is proof. And there's still just a little over 2 more seasons. So it's possible. This can be explored. Hallelujah. But that is all that I gotta talk about for this particular episode. Some Mafia parodies, some little random interesting things about Dan's personality that I kind of noticed over the course of the episode, and of course the relationship between Elise's parents, well, between Elise's parents and Elise, as well as Elise's parents and Chris, which definitely probably should be explored a lot more in the future, mostly because I want to somewhat like Elise's parents a little, because I really don't right now. Give me an excuse to like him even just the slightest bit, pretty please, with a strawberry on top. Thank you. But that is all I've got for this video, so thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction as well as its review, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters.